And you're welcome back to the programme. 22 minutes past the hour is the time. Following correspondence between the Attorney General Maura Whelan and the group Irish First Mothers, the group has today replied to the Attorney General laying formal charges of genocide against the Irish state on behalf of around 70 mothers formerly resident in mother and baby homes in this country. I'm joined on the line now by a spokesperson for the group, Fintan Dunne. Fintan Dunne, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon to you, Aidan. Thanks again for your interest in this subject. I know you keep your finger on the pulse of important matters there.
Can I just ask you, first of all, Fintan, perhaps to outline the background to this, because clearly charges of genocide against the Irish state should have people thinking seriously about what's the reason for taking this course of action. So perhaps just the background, first of all, and then we can look at the detail.
Indeed, yeah. Well, it was only months ago that the founder of Irish First Mothers, Cathy McMahon, who's been on your show,
yes,
was actually doing research and looked into the issue of genocide. And the more she looked at it, the more she began to feel that really that's what had gone on. Now, when you look at it, and we've had this in law in Ireland since 1947, when it was ratified by the United Nations after the horrors of World War II, we vowed we'd never again get involved in concentration camps of any kind and those kinds of acts. In Irish law, that was enshrined in 1973 and again in 2006 in our own Genocide Acts. So let's just look at the three signatures of genocide, the legal signs it's taking place. First question, was it a mass crime where the perpetrators had a religious motivation against the victims? Well, clearly in this case it was. Secondly, was there serious physical or mental harm inflicted upon the victims of it? And indeed there was, both physical in the early years, as we saw with Magdalene's and other maltreatment, and throughout it all, psychological harm. And then the third thing, which really shocked Cathy and the rest of the group when they saw it, was in law, in genocide, one of the criteria is, was there forced removal of children to another group? And indeed, they would say that the vast bulk of adoptions were in the end coerced.
Yes, but
so those are three signature signs.
Can I just hold you there in relation to the points you've made there? I don't think anyone can dispute the fact that there was wrongdoing, but throughout all of this, it's going to be very, very difficult to establish intent on the part of the perpetrators. And if you can't establish intent, the so-called mens rea, then you're clearly in difficulty.
Yeah, well, if you couldn't establish intent, that would indeed be a problem. But I think it's quite clear. Like, let's just take, for example, the Genocide Act of 1973. Yes. And we passed that, and it has these provisions I've just read out to you about forcible transfer of children and grievous physical harm and religiously oriented discrimination being used as the criteria. And yet in 1974, a Fine Gael Minister of Justice,
Paddy Cooney,
said to an Irish Adoption Workers Conference, I think we're all agreed, and it was the first ever conference of adoption workers, we're all agreed that the consensus opinion in our society is to the effect that adoption is better for the illegitimate baby than to be cared for by its mother. An incredible statement in retrospect, but one which we feel establishes a genocidal intent in effect.
No, I think what you have there, Fintan, what you have there in Patrick Cooney was an Irish Minister for Justice, yes, but who was a deeply conservative individual and who was looking at the situation from the viewpoint of what happened in the 70s. I mean, he clearly found it difficult to come to terms with a child being born out of wedlock. Unfortunately, that was all done away with the 1988 Act. But surely to be criticising Paddy Cooney for a remark like that is unfair, bearing in mind that we're talking about an Ireland that existed back in 1974, 43 years ago.
I think it would be unfair if I was to single him out, and I don't wish to do so, because I think he was indeed stating a consensus opinion.
Indeed.
But consensus opinions in societies can often be genocidal. And just because we are a Western developed democracy doesn't exclude us from a mature and careful consideration of whether these are valid charges. We must discharge our responsibility to these women if indeed we were genocidal in what we were at. And we would feel that the primary consideration here is the consent to adoption. Now, it's an issue that's been dealt with by Justice Lafoy and in the High Court. And it's quite clear that in order for proper consent to adoption to take place, the persons involved, the mothers, must be expressing their own will and not being subordinated to the will of others. And we assert that, in fact, there was a mass societal determination to subordinate their will to this consensus opinion, which in today's world, if you took a child off a young mother in an illegal fashion, you'd be arrested and charged with a crime.
But you mentioned Catherine McGuinness, their former judge of the Supreme Court, who I think, if I'm not mistaken, was a former member of the official Irish Adoption Board. But she's quoted as saying in conversation with RTE Radio 1's Ray Darcy that the women who gave birth to these children hadn't a great deal of choice. They were, this is quoting now Judge McGuinness, they were, shall we say, encouraged to place their children for adoption. But can't it also be said that they were encouraged by their own parents, by their own family, by their own siblings, that the role of the family of these unfortunate girls was such that they simply did not want to have within the family a child who gave birth while single?
Mm-hmm. It would be true to say that, and indeed the Taoiseach has singled out the culpability of us all collectively. But besides that, the institutions where the families carried out their opinions and put them into effect were religious institutions in the first place and state-funded and supervised in the second place. So the process of encouragement was quite systematic in its scope. And I think that the judge was really, when you say encouraged, that it almost has in some ways a sinister aspect to it when you put the word in quotes like that. I mean, I can always sequester you somewhere and encourage you to do things, but I am in fact impeding your will and committing crimes if it involves serious lifelong harm.
Yes, but perhaps, Fintan, they did so with the best of intentions because the child would be best looked after by adoptive parents rather than a young adult.
Yes. Well, we could try and explain that to Senator Lynn Ruane at the moment, who is an accomplished senator and indeed was somebody who in a former era would have been deemed to be an unfit mother. These fitness to be a parent are not to be made ad hoc. There are certain constitutional rights that these mothers had and parental rights which they had, which we feel were completely discarded.
Now, can I just look at the mechanics of this? Genocide is not subject to the rules pertaining to a crime being statute barred, so that should not be a defence. But basically what you're saying is that the state should essentially prosecute itself. Yeah,
well, it sounds indeed, it's been said to be bizarre legally, but it is a bizarre legal fact. The obligations of, let's say, an underdeveloped country with an inferior administration system would be that the Attorney General will be contacted by the International Criminal Court or concerned parties, and the Attorney General on examination might contact the DPP and admit that the state should be prosecuted, but perhaps for failing to prevent genocide, let's say, but deny that it committed genocide. So these are the sort of normal mechanisms, really, by which the state could invite prosecution from the DPP.
Yes, but, I mean, how can the Director of Public Prosecutions, who is effectively the state, how can the DPP prosecute the state?
Prosecute the state? Well, these matters have been looked into internationally and legal experts have examined. Sorry, we're probably putting across each other, but I'll just complete that point. These issues have been examined legally, and partly in consideration of this is why we've asked the International Criminal Court presidency to get involved on an ad hoc basis and to informally advise the Attorney General how to proceed.
And do you seriously think that's likely to happen?
I think that there is a change taking place in Ireland in relation to these issues. That Tuam has been a signature moment when, if you like, we saw for the first time mass undocumented graves. something which is a haunting signature of any kind of genocidal structure, and began to face the reality of what we've done. I feel, having been privileged to help these women in their campaign over the last few years in particular, that they are coming into their own in their ability to articulate the deep and lasting harm that was done to them, and that Irish attitudes will signally change to them in the same way as it has to gays and the members of the travelling community. They are, if you like, the last group who are the untouchables to come out in Ireland.
Fintan, final thought. Would it not be wiser in terms of the law if these women were to sue the state for the type of behaviour to which they were subjected, or the religious orders, if that's the case, rather than embarking on what is clearly a very novel suggestion of the state prosecuting itself because of genocide?
Well, if we look closely at the issue, we have also in that letter to the Attorney General suggested that religious institutional structures might also be subject to prosecution. And beyond that, we have not gone. But it would offer a route whereby statute of limitations criteria would not apply, because they don't in cases of genocide, and perhaps open up a route for proper redress, which is an issue we've also failed to address. So we think it is a valid mechanism for the state to look at in its own interest in terms of prosecuting these issues too.
Well, it certainly is fascinating, and all I can say to you, Fintan, is the very best of luck with that. I don't know whether it's likely to proceed successfully or not, but time will tell.
Well, whether, in fact, it's found, what we think is due regard must be given to these issues and due process must apply, and we'll be hoping to achieve that.
Very good. Fintan Dunne, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you indeed, Aidan.
The Grapevine with Aidan Crowley.